A bullet whistled past Marcus Chen's ear so close he could feel the heat. Blood dripped from his temple as he pressed himself against the frozen rock, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter mountain air.
Around him, his SEAL team was pinned down by enemy fire, trapped in a deadly crossfire with nowhere to run. "Ghost is down!"
"Ghost is down." The voice crackled through his radio, but there was no response from their sniper. Sarah "Ghost" Rodriguez had been their guardian angel for 3 years, the invisible protector who watched over them from impossible distances. Now, in the worst blizzard Afghanistan had seen in decades, she had vanished without a trace. What Marcus didn't know was that at that very moment, half a mile away and buried under 3 feet of snow, Sarah was making a choice that would either save her team or doom them all. With a broken leg, a failing radio, and enemy forces closing in from all sides, she had to become something more than a sniper. She had to become a ghost, in the truest sense of the word. This is the story of how one woman's disappearance became her team's salvation, and how sometimes the greatest victories come from the shadows where heroes are born and legends are made. The morning started like any other mission for SEAL Team 7. Sarah Rodriguez adjusted her scope one final time, her breath steady despite the thin mountain air at 8,000 feet. Below her, the valley stretched out like a frozen wasteland, dotted with rocky outcrops and sparse vegetation that clung desperately to life in the harsh Afghan winter. "Ghost, radio check," came the familiar voice of Lieutenant Marcus Chen through her earpiece. "Ghost here, crystal clear," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She had earned her call sign not just for her ability to remain unseen, but for how quietly she could eliminate threats before anyone knew she was there. Sarah had grown up in the mountains of Colorado, where her father taught her to hunt before she could properly tie her shoes. By age 12, she could hit a target at 300 yards with her grandfather's old rifle. By 18, she was the youngest person ever to qualify for the U.S. Olympic shooting team. But instead of pursuing gold medals, she chose a different kind of service. "Target building is 2 clicks southeast of your position," Sarah reported, scanning the compound through her scope. "I count 15 hostiles armed with AK-47s and what looks like an RPG on the north tower." Intelligence had located a high-value target in a remote compound, someone who had been coordinating attacks against NATO forces. SEAL Team 7 was tasked with capturing him alive and extracting any intelligence from his compound. Marcus and his 5-man team were positioned at the base of the valley, hidden among the rocks. They would move in fast and hard while Sarah provided overwatch from her elevated position. It was a textbook operation they had executed dozens of times before. But as Sarah settled into her shooting position, something felt different. The wind patterns were erratic, swirling in ways that didn't make sense for the terrain. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since they inserted, and dark clouds were building on the horizon with unusual speed. "Storm's coming in faster than predicted," she radioed down to the team. "Weather station must have missed this one." Marcus checked his watch. They had a narrow window before their extraction helicopter would be forced to leave due to weather conditions. "We're moving now. Keep us covered, Ghost." Sarah watched through her scope as the team advanced toward the compound. Marcus took point, his movements fluid and precise despite the rocky terrain. Behind him, Rodriguez carried the team's heavy weapons, while Thompson and Williams flanked left and right. Martinez brought up the rear, constantly checking their 6 for any signs of pursuit. The operation began smoothly. Sarah's first shot took out the guard in the north tower before he could even register the team's approach. Her second shot disabled the RPG, sending it tumbling from the tower to smash against the rocks below. The team breached the compound walls and began clearing buildings room by room. But something was wrong. The intelligence had been off. Instead of 15 hostiles, there were at least 30, and they were better armed and organized than expected. Sarah could hear the increasing volume of gunfire echoing up from the valley as her team encountered fierce resistance. "Ghost, we need suppressive fire on the southeast corner." Marcus's voice came through, strained with effort. "They've got us pinned down." Sarah shifted her position, acquired the target, and squeezed the trigger. 1 hostile down. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. Another enemy fighter dropped, but for every target she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The wind was picking up now, howling through the rocky peaks with increasing intensity. Snow began to fall, light at first but quickly becoming heavier. Sarah had to adjust her calculations constantly as the wind affected her bullet trajectory. "Marcus, you need to get out of there," she radioed. "This storm is going to get bad fast, and there are more hostiles than we planned for." "Negative, Ghost. We found the HVT, but he's got intel we need. Give us 10 more minutes. Let's stand out." 10 minutes in these mountains could mean the difference between extraction and being trapped for days. She had seen how quickly weather could turn deadly at this altitude, but she trusted Marcus's judgment. If he said they needed 10 minutes, she would give them 10 minutes. The snow was falling harder now, reducing visibility significantly. Sarah had to rely more on muzzle flashes and movement than clear visual identification. She switched to her thermal scope, but even that was becoming difficult. As the temperature differential decreased, that's when she saw them. Through the swirling snow, at least 20 more enemy fighters were moving up the valley from the east, heading straight for her team's position. They were walking into a trap, and Marcus had no way of knowing. "Marcus, you've got company coming from the east. At least 20 hostiles moving fast." "Copy that, Ghost. We're almost done here. Can you slow them down?" This is how they came intentionally. These essentially deuced as energy but accepted. They made it to the end. The campus popped up on a fireplace in American record. She managed to drop 3 of them before the others scattered for cover, but they were still advancing, just more cautiously now. The storm was intensifying with frightening speed. What had started as light snow was now a full blizzard, with wind speeds that had to be approaching 60 miles per hour. Sarah's elevated position, which had been an advantage, was now becoming a liability as she was more exposed to the elements. "Ghost, we're moving to extract. Package secured. What's your status? Get back to work." Sarah tried to respond, but her radio crackled with static. The storm was interfering with communications. She tried again, adjusting frequencies, but couldn't get through clearly. She began breaking down her shooting position, preparing to move to the primary extraction point 2 kilometers away. But as she started to move, disaster struck. The rock ledge she had been lying on, weakened by the sudden temperature change and battered by the wind, gave way without warning. Sarah felt herself falling through the swirling snow, her rifle and equipment scattering as she tumbled down the steep mountainside. She hit hard, her left leg twisting at an unnatural angle as she slammed into a boulder. Pain shot through her body like fire, and for a moment, everything went black. When she came to, she was partially buried in snow at the bottom of a ravine, at least 50 feet below where she had started. Sarah tried to move and immediately regretted it. Her leg was definitely broken, possibly in multiple places. Her rifle was nowhere to be seen, likely buried somewhere in the snow above her. Her radio was damaged, producing nothing but static when she tried to transmit. She was alone, injured, and trapped in a blizzard that showed no signs of stopping. Worse, she had no way to contact her team to let them know her status. For all they knew, she had simply vanished. But Sarah Rodriguez hadn't survived 3 years as a SEAL sniper by giving up when things got difficult. She forced herself to think clearly despite the pain and the cold. Her team was still out there, still in danger, and they needed her. She inventoried what she had left. Her sidearm was still holstered and functional. She had 2 extra magazines. Her knife was secured to her vest. Her first aid kit was intact, though she wasn't sure how much good it would do for a compound fracture. Most importantly, she still had her training and her determination. The snow continued to fall heavily, and Sarah realized she needed shelter immediately or she would die of exposure within hours. Using her knife and her good leg, she began digging a snow cave into the side of the ravine, working methodically despite the agony in her broken leg. As she dug, she could hear the distant sound of gunfire echoing through the storm. Her team was still engaged with the enemy, still fighting for their lives while she was trapped and unable to help them. The frustration was almost worse than the physical pain. But Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes the best help comes from the most unexpected places. As she settled into her makeshift shelter to wait out the worst of the storm, she began formulating a plan. She might be down, but she definitely wasn't out. The enemy thought SEAL Team 7's sniper had been eliminated. They thought their guardian angel had fallen. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In the mountains of Afghanistan, legends are born in moments of desperation, and Sarah Rodriguez was about to become something more than just a sniper. She was about to become a ghost in the truest sense, and ghosts have a way of appearing when you least expect them. The storm raged on, but inside her snow cave, Sarah's resolve burned brighter than any fire. Her team needed her, and she would find a way to reach them, broken leg or not. Because that's what SEALs do. They never leave a teammate behind, and they never give up no matter how impossible the odds might seem. As the wind howled outside her shelter, Sarah closed her eyes and began planning her return from the dead. Ara's eyes snapped open to the sound of voices speaking in Pashto. She had been unconscious for at least 2 hours, and the pain in her leg had intensified to a level that made her vision blur. But the voices meant enemy fighters were nearby, searching for her team or possibly for her. She pressed herself deeper into her snow cave, controlling her breathing to minimize any visible vapor in the cold air. Through a small opening she had left for air circulation, she could see 4 Taliban fighters moving through the ravine. their AK-47s at the ready. They were methodically checking every possible hiding spot. One of them stopped directly above her position and began probing the snow with his rifle barrel. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm, but she knew that firing would give away her position to others who might be nearby. She held her breath as the rifle probe came within inches of her makeshift shelter. After what felt like an eternity, the fighter moved on, apparently satisfied that the area was clear. Sarah waited another 30 minutes before allowing herself to breathe normally again. She needed to move, but first she had to deal with her broken leg. Using strips torn from her uniform and a piece of broken wood she found in the ravine, Sarah fashioned a crude splint. The process was excruciating, but she bit down on a piece of leather from her gear to muffle any sounds. She couldn't afford to be discovered now. Her radio was still producing nothing but static, but she kept trying different frequencies, hoping to establish contact with her team. Finally, on a rarely used emergency channel, she heard a faint voice through the interference. Any station, this is 7-1. Ghost, if you can hear this. We are moving to secondary extraction. Storm has grounded all air assets. We are on foot to Rally Point Charlie. Repeat, moving to Rally Point Charlie. Rally Point Charlie was 8 kilometers away through mountainous terrain that would be treacherous even in good weather. In this blizzard, with enemy forces in the area, it might as well have been on the moon. But it was where her team was heading, and that meant it was where she needed to go. Sarah gathered what remained of her equipment. Her rifle was gone, buried somewhere in the avalanche of snow and rocks from her fall. She had her pistol with 2 spare magazines, her knife, basic first aid supplies, and about half a liter of water. It wasn't much to survive on in this environment, but it would have to do. Moving with a broken leg through deep snow was a nightmare beyond description. Each step sent waves of agony through her body, and she had to stop frequently to rest and fight off waves of nausea. But Sarah had endured the same brutal SEAL training as her male counterparts. She knew how to push through pain that would incapacitate most people. More importantly, she knew her team was counting on her, even if they didn't realize it yet. As she struggled through the snow, Sarah began to piece together what had happened. The intelligence for this mission had been compromised. The enemy had known they were coming and had prepared accordingly. Her team was walking into what was essentially an ambush, and the weather had eliminated their primary means of extraction. But Sarah also realized she now had an advantage that no one expected. The enemy thought she was dead. They had seen her fall, had heard no radio transmissions from her position, and had found no trace of her in their search. As far as they were concerned, SEAL Team 7's sniper had been eliminated. She was a ghost now in the literal sense, and ghosts could move unseen through the battlefield. After 2 hours of agonizing travel, Sarah reached a ridgeline that gave her a view of the valley below. What she saw made her blood run cold. At least 60 enemy fighters were positioned along the route to Rally Point Charlie, clearly waiting in ambush for her team. They had heavy weapons, including mortars and machine guns positioned at key choke points. Marcus was leading his team directly into a trap, and they had no way of knowing it. Sarah's radio crackled to life again, this time with better clarity. Ghost. Ghost. This is 7-1. If you're alive, we need you now. We're taking heavy fire from all directions. Multiple wounded. Can't reach extraction. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of intense gunfire in the distance. Sarah could see muzzle flashes erupting from a position about 3 kilometers away, where her team was apparently pinned down by superior numbers. She tried to respond, but her radio was still too damaged to transmit clearly. Even if she could get through, what could she tell them? She was miles away, barely mobile, and armed with only a pistol. But as Sarah watched the one-sided battle unfolding below, an idea began to form. It was desperate, probably suicidal, but it might be their only chance. The enemy had positioned their ambush, assuming that SEAL Team 7 was operating with full support, including sniper overwatch. They had placed their heavy weapons in command positions in locations that would be safe from long-range rifle fire from the direction of Sarah's original position, but they hadn't considered the possibility of a sniper attacking from behind their own lines. Sarah began working her way around the enemy positions using the storm as cover. The blizzard that had been her enemy was now her ally, concealing her movements as she struggled through the deep snow toward the enemy's rear area. It took her nearly 3 hours to circle around behind the main enemy position. By then, the gunfire from her team's position had become sporadic, which could mean they were running low on ammunition or that some of them had been hit. She found what she was looking for, on a small rise overlooking the enemy's main command post. An enemy sniper had set up position there, using a Russian-made Dragunov rifle to provide long-range support for the ambush. He was focused entirely on the battle below, never imagining that danger could come from behind him. Sarah studied the position carefully. The enemy sniper was alone, confident in his security. His rifle was exactly what she needed to turn the tide of the battle. But getting to him would require crossing 20 meters of open ground while dragging her broken leg through the snow. She waited until a particularly intense exchange of gunfire erupted below, then began her approach. Each movement was carefully calculated, timed to coincide with the sounds of battle that would mask any noise she made. The enemy sniper never knew what hit him. Sarah's knife found its mark silently and efficiently, and suddenly she had the weapon she desperately needed. The Dragunov was unfamiliar to her, but the basics were the same as any precision rifle. Sarah quickly adjusted the scope and began identifying targets among the enemy positions. Her first shot took out the machine gun team that had been pouring fire down on her team. Her second eliminated the mortar crew that had been dropping rounds dangerously close to Marcus's position. The enemy fighters were confused and disoriented by the sudden flanking fire. They had no idea where the shots were coming from, and in the swirling snow and wind, they couldn't locate her muzzle flashes. Sarah worked methodically, prioritizing targets that posed the greatest threat to her team. Every shot had to count because she didn't know how much ammunition the rifle had, and she couldn't risk giving away her position by missing. Through her scope, she could see her team beginning to move. Taking advantage of the confusion in the enemy ranks, Marcus was leading them toward a rocky outcrop that would provide better cover, while Thompson provided suppressing fire with the team's machine gun. But then Sarah saw something that made her heart stop. A group of enemy fighters had flanked around to cut off her team's escape route. They were setting up an ambush at the exact spot where Marcus was leading his men. She tried to shift her fire to engage the new threat, but the angle was wrong from her current position. She would have to move, which meant exposing herself and risking detection. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the rifle and began moving to a new firing position, ignoring the screaming pain in her leg. She had to reach the new spot before her team walked into the trap. She made it with seconds to spare. Her first shot from the new position dropped the leader of the flanking group just as he was preparing to open fire on Marcus. Her second and third shot scattered the rest of the ambush team, buying her team the precious seconds they needed to reach cover. But her new position was more exposed, and the enemy had finally figured out roughly where she was. Bullets began impacting around her position, forcing her to keep moving despite her injury. The battle continued for another hour, with Sarah playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with the remaining enemy fighters. She would fire from one position, then painfully relocate before return fire could find her. All the while, she continued to provide cover for her team as they fought their way toward the extraction point. Finally, as the storm began to clear slightly, Sarah heard the sound she had been hoping for all day. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors echoed across the mountains. Their extraction had arrived, but the enemy heard it too, and they began a final desperate assault on her team's position. Sarah realized she was running low on ammunition, and her broken leg was making it harder and harder to move between positions. That's when she made the decision that would either save her team or get them all killed. Instead of continuing to snipe from a distance, she was going to get closer to the action. Much closer. Abandoning the sniper rifle, Sarah drew her pistol and began working her way down toward the main battle. If her team was going to make it to that helicopter, they were going to need all the help they could get, and sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. The Ghost was about to rejoin the living, but first she had to survive what came next. And in the chaos of the final battle, survival was going to require everything she had learned in her years as a SEAL, plus a few tricks that weren't in any training manual. The helicopter was getting closer, but so were the enemy reinforcements that had been moving through the mountains all day. It was going to be a race to see who reached the extraction point first, and Sarah was determined to make sure her team won that race no matter what it cost her. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder, but Sarah could see that her team was still pinned down 300 meters from the extraction point. Enemy fighters had established a defensive line between SEAL Team 7 and Salvation, and they weren't going to give up easily. Sarah worked her way through the rocks and snow, her broken legs screaming with every movement. She had abandoned the sniper rifle because she needed mobility more than long-range precision now. With just her pistol and her training, she was going to have to get creative. As she moved closer to the battle, she could hear Marcus on the radio coordinating with the helicopter pilot. Bird 1, this is 7-1. Landing zone is hot. We need immediate suppression on the ridgeline to our north. 7-1, this is Bird 1. We see your position but can't provide close air support in these wind conditions. You need to clear a path to the LZ. Sarah could see the problem clearly now. The enemy had positioned fighters with RPGs on the high ground overlooking the landing zone. Any helicopter that tried to land would be a sitting duck, but her team couldn't advance without exposing themselves to devastating crossfire. That's when Sarah noticed something the enemy fighters had missed. There was a dried creek bed that ran along the base of the ridge, hidden from their main positions by an outcrop of rocks. If she could work her way along that creek bed, she might be able to get behind their defensive line. It would mean crawling through freezing mud and snow for almost a quarter mile with a broken leg, but it was their only chance. Sarah keyed her damaged radio one more time. 7-1 Ghost. The transmission was barely audible through the static, but she saw Marcus's head turn in her direction. Ghost? Sarah, is that you?
We thought you were KIA. Not dead yet.
Give me 10 minutes, then advance on my signal. She clicked off before Marcus could respond and began her crawl along the creek bed. Every movement was agony, but she forced herself to continue. Behind her, she could hear the steady thrum of the helicopter circling, waiting for a chance to land. The creek bed was even worse than she had anticipated. The water was partially frozen, creating a slush that soaked through her uniform and chilled her to the bone. Sharp rocks tore at her elbows and knees as she pulled herself forward, and twice she had to stop to prevent herself from passing out from the pain in her leg. But she kept moving, driven by the knowledge that 5 of her teammates were counting on her. These weren't just fellow soldiers. They were her family. Marcus had pulled her out of a burning building in Syria. Thompson had carried her for 2 miles when she took shrapnel in her shoulder during a mission in Iraq. Williams had stayed with her in a field hospital for 3 days when she got malaria. They had never left her behind, and she wasn't about to leave them now. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Sarah reached the position she had been aiming for. She was now behind the main enemy defensive line, with a clear view of their positions. But she also realized the situation was even worse than she had thought. There weren't just the fighters she could see. Hidden in caves and behind rocks were at least 20 more enemy combatants, all waiting for her team to make their final push toward the helicopter. It would be a massacre. Sarah had 13 rounds left in her pistol, and 2 spare magazines. Against 40 or more enemy fighters, it should have been hopeless. But Sarah Rodriguez hadn't survived 3 years in special operations by accepting hopeless situations. She began moving again, this time working her way up behind the enemy positions. Her plan was simple in concept but nearly impossible in execution. She was going to attack the enemy defensive line from behind, creating enough chaos and confusion to give her team a chance to advance. Her first target was the RPG team positioned on the high ground.
They were the greatest threat to the helicopter, and eliminating them was the top priority. Sarah worked her way to within 50 meters of their position, using every piece of cover the rocky terrain provided.
The 2 fighters manning the RPG were focused entirely on the helicopter circling overhead, waiting for it to attempt a landing. They never saw Sarah emerge from behind a boulder, pistol raised. 2 quick shots and the immediate threat to the helicopter was eliminated. But the gunfire alerted other enemy positions, and suddenly the mountainside erupted in chaos as fighters tried to figure out where the attack was coming from. Sarah was already moving to her next target, a machine gun position that commanded the approach to the landing zone. But as she moved, her broken leg finally gave out completely. She collapsed behind a rock outcrop, her vision graying from the pain. For a moment, she considered giving up. She had done what she could, eliminated the RPG threat, and given her team a fighting chance. Maybe that was enough. But then she heard Marcus's voice over the radio, strained with worry and determination. "Ghost, wherever you are, we're moving now." "Hold on, we're coming for you." Her team was advancing into the teeth of the enemy defensive line, not to reach the helicopter, but to find her. They were risking everything to save a teammate they thought was wounded and trapped somewhere in the rocks. Sarah forced herself to stand. Her leg couldn't support her weight anymore, so she used her rifle as a crutch and continued her attack on the enemy positions. Each shot had to count now because she was running low on ammunition and couldn't afford to miss. The machine gun nest was her next target. The crew was frantically trying to reposition their weapon to engage her team's advance, but they were also watching for threats from other directions after the RPG team had been eliminated. Sarah waited until they were focused on Marcus's position, then attacked. Her first shot took out the gunner, her second dropped the assistant. The machine gun fell silent just as her team came into its field of fire. But now she was truly exposed.
Enemy fighters were closing in on her position from multiple directions, and she could hear their shouts as they coordinated their response to her one-woman assault on their defensive line. Sarah found herself trapped behind a small cluster of rocks with enemy fighters approaching from 3 sides.
She had maybe 6 rounds left in her current magazine, with 2 full magazines remaining. Against a dozen or more fighters, the math wasn't in her favor. That's when the helicopter pilot made a decision that probably saved all their lives. Instead of waiting for the landing zone to be completely secure, he brought his aircraft in low and fast, using the helicopter's door gunners to provide suppressing fire on the enemy positions. The sudden appearance of the aircraft directly over the battlefield caught everyone by surprise. The enemy fighters who had been closing in on Sarah's position were forced to take cover as .50 caliber rounds churned up the ground around them. In the confusion, Sarah saw her chance. She broke from cover and began moving toward her team's position, half running, half falling, as her injured leg refused to cooperate. Behind her, enemy fighters were beginning to recover from the surprise of the helicopter's aggressive approach. Marcus saw her coming and immediately directed his team to provide covering fire. Thompson and Williams laid down a base of suppressing fire, while Rodriguez moved to intercept Sarah and help her reach cover.
"I thought you were dead," Rodriguez shouted over the noise of gunfire and helicopter rotors. "Not yet," Sarah gasped, accepting his help as they moved toward the landing zone.
But I'm working on it. The final push to the helicopter was the longest 100 meters of Sarah's life. Enemy fire was coming from multiple directions, and she could feel bullets snapping past her head as Rodriguez half-carried her across the open ground. Marcus was coordinating the team's movement while laying down precise rifle fire to keep enemy heads down. Thompson had taken a round through his shoulder but was still operating his machine gun effectively. Williams was bleeding from a head wound but continued advancing and firing. Martinez brought up the rear, constantly checking for threats from behind while helping to cover their withdrawal to the helicopter. The helicopter pilot showed incredible skill and courage, keeping his aircraft steady despite the intense ground fire and difficult wind conditions.
The door gunners continued to provide suppressing fire, their heavy weapons keeping the enemy fighters from mounting an effective counterattack. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah felt herself being pushed up into the helicopter's cabin.
Strong hands pulled her inside as the rest of the team piled in behind her. She could hear Marcus doing a head count as the aircraft began to lift off. "Everyone's aboard! Go, go, go!" As the helicopter climbed away from the landing zone, Sarah caught a glimpse of the battlefield they were leaving behind. The enemy fighters were emerging from cover, firing uselessly at the departing aircraft. The positions she had attacked were littered with evidence of her one-woman assault on their defensive line. "Ghost, you magnificent, crazy woman," Marcus said, sitting down beside her as the helicopter's medic began working on her leg. "How the hell did you survive that fall?" Sarah managed a weak smile despite the pain.
"Basic SEAL training. Never give up. Never leave a teammate behind."
"You saved our lives," Thompson said from his own stretcher, his shoulder wound being bandaged by another medic. "We were walking into a complete ambush. That's what spotters do," Sarah replied.
"We watch your backs." But privately, Sarah knew it had been more than just doing her job. It had been about family, about the bonds forged in combat that run deeper than blood.
These men would have died trying to rescue her even though they thought she was already gone. The least she could do was return the favor. The helicopter medic was examining her leg with professional concern. "This is going to need surgery as soon as we get back to base." "How long have you been walking on this?" "Long enough," Sarah said, finally allowing herself to relax now that her team was safe. As the helicopter flew toward the safety of their forward operating base, Sarah looked out the small window at the mountains of Afghanistan passing below. Somewhere down there, in a ravine filled with snow, was the position where SEAL Team 7's sniper had supposedly died. But ghosts don't really die, Sarah thought to herself. They just learn to move through the world differently, appearing when they're needed most and disappearing when their work is done. She had vanished without a trace in that blizzard, but she had returned as something more than she had been before. She had become the guardian angel her team needed. The invisible protector who watched over them from impossible distances and impossible situations. 6 months later, after multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy, Sarah Rodriguez returned to active duty with SEAL Team 7. Her teammates welcomed her back with the quiet respect reserved for someone who had proven herself in the most extreme circumstances possible. She still carried the call sign Ghost, but now it meant something different. It wasn't just about her ability to remain unseen while providing sniper support. It was about her ability to appear when her team needed her most, no matter what the odds or circumstances.
The official mission report stated that SEAL Team 7 successfully eliminated a high-value target and extracted valuable intelligence despite encountering unexpected enemy resistance and severe weather conditions. It mentioned that the team's sniper had been temporarily separated from the unit due to adverse conditions, but had continued to provide effective support throughout the operation. What it didn't mention was how one woman's refusal to give up had saved the lives of 5 of America's finest warriors.
How sometimes the greatest victories come not from superior firepower or perfect planning, but from the simple determination to never leave a teammate behind. In the mountains of Afghanistan, legends are born in moments of desperation. Sarah Rodriguez had vanished without a trace in a blizzard, only to return as something more than human, more than soldier, more than sniper. She had returned as a ghost, and ghosts protect their own.